Hey guys, tonight we descend into the soft hush of damp earth, beneath skies heavy with mist and centuries of habit. You're not a knight, not a merchant, not a monk. No, tonight you're someone far more overlooked, but far more essential. You're a medieval gravedigger. And your day starts before anyone else's. No trumpet calls, no market hustle, no rooster even dares to break the silence yet. The only sound is your own breath, slow and familiar, and the creak of wooden floorboards under your calloused feet. The chill bites immediately. Your cottage, built with more gaps than plans, doesn't hold warmth long. You rub your fingers together, not for comfort, but for movement. They need to bend by the time you're in the ground, figuratively, for now. There's no wife making breakfast, no children to hug goodbye. It's just you, your tools, and the ever-hungry earth. You trudge outside, your boots unlaced, your thoughts already halfway to the cemetery. The sky is a blanket of gray. Not yet day, but no longer night. The kind of sky that makes it hard to tell how long you've slept or even if you should be awake at all. Your work begins long before anyone else's because no one really wants to see it. They want the graves to be there, ready, tidy, perhaps even reverent, but not to know how they got that way. And so you rise early. You walk the same trail, muddy and worn, marked by your own footprints, day after day. Sometimes you think they'll find those prints one day and say, the work of a solitary man. The spade waits by the door, leaning against a bucket full of yesterday's soil. It's chipped, of course, and the handle has been smoothed into a curve your palm knows better than it knows kindness. You sling your corded rope over your shoulder, already knotted to measure a man from head to toe. It's not fancy, but it saves time. And in your world, time is rarely yours. Historians still argue whether gravediggers like you were respected or reviled. Truth is, it doesn't matter much to you. You're necessary. The kind of necessary that never earns thanks, but always earns glances. Glances when you walk into a room, when you pick through apples at the market, when you sit too close at Mass, the kind of necessary that people both fear and forget. You pass the baker's boy on your way out of the village. He's too sleepy to flinch, but he still edges away, like you might drag his soul into the dirt with you. You nod anyway, polite as a priest. No one taught you not to be. Ahead, the churchyard gate looms, crooked and vine-covered, as though even nature tries to forget this place. But you know better. You know every stone in that wall, every dip in that soil. You've buried friends, enemies, strangers, and once almost yourself. That's a story for another morning. Right now, the fog clings to the headstones like old gossip, curling between the names. Some of the stones lean so far they seem to be whispering to each other. Others stand defiant, smug in their expensive carvings in borrowed Latin. You exhale. The day hasn't even begun, and already it weighs on your shoulders. You're not just digging holes. You're carving space in a world that doesn't want to make room for death. But death doesn't care. Death always arrives. Whether there's space or not, you just make sure it has somewhere to lie down. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still with me, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the gate, and the world quiets even further. The birds don't sing here in the early morning. Not yet. They wait for you to start digging.
The spade's wooden shaft fits in your grip like it was carved just for you, which it might as well have been after years of smoothing under rain and skin. The metal head is nicked from stones, bent slightly to the left from your own bad habits, but it still cuts through wet soil better than any sermon cuts through silence. You crouch beside the marker. This one is new, so new the lettering on the temporary board hasn't even faded yet. Her name was Bridget, you think. Midwife, mother of 7. A sharp-tongued woman who laughed through missing teeth. You liked her. That's unusual. Not because you're cold, but because getting too warm in your work makes things heavier than they already are. The grave needs to be 5 feet deep, 6 if you have time, but Father Edric once muttered something about the Lord knowing shortcuts, so 5 will do. The rope across your shoulders comes down, uncoiled in practiced loops. 2 knots for the width, 3 for the height. You eye the ground, angle your boot, and the first slice of earth peels away with a shk that feels too loud for this early hour. Some diggers talk while they work, mutter prayers, tell themselves stories. You just breathe, in through your teeth, out through your nose. A rhythm, a kind of silent hymn. With each scoop, the grave takes shape, a box for memory, wrapped in soil. Historians still argue whether gravediggers held an official title or were simply laborers passed from death to death. You're not bothered. You don't need parchment to feel the truth of your post. You stand closer to the edge of life than most priests do. After an hour, the scent changes. The topsoil gives way to something damper, older. It's richer, like the breath of a cellar. You pause to flex your fingers. Mud-caked knuckles popping like overcooked stew. A worm wriggles free at the edge of your blade. You watch it coil and disappear again, unbothered, free. You envy it, briefly. This is the part no one sees. Not the nobleman in velvet, not the weeping child, not even the priest when he blesses the mound. Just you and the earth. And if it caves in, well, you'll just have to dig yourself out, won't you? The grave deepens. Morning thickens. Light starts to pry its way through the clouds, casting long, thin shadows across the leaning stones. You stop, breath misting. Not to rest exactly, but to look. Because you see them. Not ghosts, you're not daft, but traces. The way the moss clings only to the east-facing names. The stones that tilt slightly in the direction the wind always blows. The ones with no names at all, just a circle and a line. You know who's where even without the records, especially those who never made it to the records. The ones they buried quickly, quietly. The ones you're not supposed to speak of. Like the woman in the corner plot. No stone. Just a cluster of violets that bloom every spring, even when nothing else does. She wasn't married. That's all you'll say. You climb out of the grave and lean on your spade. Your back twinges, your legs ache, your mouth tastes like copper. And still, the grave isn't quite ready. Not until it's dressed. You smooth the sides with your blade, flatten the base with the back edge. You tuck loose earth around the corners like a man folding a sheet over a guest bed. You'll line it with pine needles if you can find some, if not, a bit of straw. It's not for the dead. It's for you. A ritual. A kind of comfort. Because you dig holes all day long, but you also fill them in. And that, perhaps, is the stranger part. How you pack the soil down again, as if pretending nothing ever happened. As if she was never here. As if you weren't the last one to see her face. Someone asked if you ever cry. You said no. But the truth is more complicated. You do cry. You just do it with your hands. Quietly. With dirt under your nails. And only when no one's looking.
By mid-morning, your hands are stiff with cold and packed with grit beneath every nail, but you barely notice. It's muscle memory now. The digging, the lifting,
the silent calibrations of angle and pressure. You've done this enough times to know when the earth is going to fight you and when it's going to give in like a tired mule. Your feet find the familiar path leading along the edge of the cemetery, where the older graves sagged like forgotten promises. Here, the stones are simpler, worn smooth by time and neglect, the names barely legible, some etched with symbols instead of letters. A chalice here, a fish there, a crude angel with wings that look more like cabbage leaves. You stop beside one in particular, your spade tapping against the stone in greeting. Old Gregory, still slouched over like you drank the dirt. You can't help it. Some stones just invite conversation. This one belonged to a miller who never paid his tithe, and who, according to the priest, would have been buried in a ditch if not for his widow's tearful persuasion and a slightly illegal donation of grain. You remember because you dug him twice. The first time, the spot flooded. The second time, he stayed put. Historians still argue whether gravesites were assigned by social status or just sheer convenience. You know the truth lies somewhere between divine order and who bribed whom. You've seen noblemen buried near the compost pit and paupers tucked suspiciously close to the altar. You bend to inspect the patch of ground where your next grave will go. The soil looks soft today, dark and loamy, the kind that smells like wet moss and old leaves. Good digging dirt. You scratch a small cross into the earth with your boot heel, a placeholder, a promise. Then you turn toward the tool shed, a leaning hovel of half-rotten planks where the cemetery's few communal tools live out their damp, unloved days. Inside, the air is thick with mildew and rust. You grab a wheelbarrow with a squeak like a dying goose and load it with a fresh wooden marker, a post-hole digger, and 2 lengths of linen cord, one for the grave, one for the body when it arrives. Your thoughts drift as you push the cart back toward the worksite. Not far, just enough to wander. You think about that time last spring when the town butcher died mid-sentence, reportedly while arguing about the price of pickled eel. You dug his grave beneath a weeping ash tree, and the roots fought you every step of the way. One of them split your spade in half. You cursed, loudly, and got scolded by a nun passing by. She didn't see you replace the root with care. You always do, because trees remember the dead, you suspect, more faithfully than people do. As you unload your gear and begin marking the corners, the breeze shifts. It carries the scent of baking bread from the village and something sharper, iron and smoke. You pause, sniff. The forge must be active. Someone is shoeing a horse, or maybe making nails for coffins. Not that you need many of those. Most coffins arrive hastily nailed together from crooked planks. Some are just shrouds, the cloth worn thin by the time it reaches your hands. You've laid more bodies in linen than in wood, and sometimes you wonder what happens to the dead who are swaddled in too little. Do they shiver? Do they feel the difference? You tell yourself no, but you still double wrap the infants. There's something you can't quite explain about digging a grave for someone who never learned to walk. Your body slows, your breath shallows, and your spade, so sure in every other moment, begins to hesitate at every cut. The grave you're digging today, though, is for a grown woman, you think. You haven't been told, but the name sounds like someone who sang more than she spoke, who baked without measuring, who made jokes too clever for her age. That's the story you write for her as you dig, because the truth is, you invent lives, constantly, for the nameless, the voiceless, the rushed and the ruined. You build them in your mind, piece by piece, just to give the silence a little less sting. The wind picks up again. It rustles the trees overhead and sends a light shower of petals tumbling down from the hedge of hawthorn. They drift across the half-dug grave like confetti at a funeral. You smile. Not because it's funny, but because it's absurd. And in your world, absurdity is often the only softness you get. You keep digging. And the world, for once, lets you be. You press your heel into the shovel's edge, let your weight do the work, and feel the earth split open like a secret. The third grave of the day, and the sun's barely past the church bell. A quiet sort of pride settles on your shoulders, but not enough to slow you down. The day's not over, not even close. The grave is wider this time, heavier boots to fill it. You reckon it's for a cooper or a man built like one. You can always tell. The ones who lived with barrels, who hoisted wood hoops and thick oak like twigs, they leave behind a different kind of silence. Above, the clouds have thinned. A milky light drapes across the moss, just soft enough to make shadows look like memories. You shift your stance, dig deeper, feel the sweat bead along your spine despite the morning chill. You're not alone in the cemetery. You rarely are. There's always someone watching from the edge. An old widow with a kerchief in her fist, a parish boy with too many questions, or the occasional drunk who mistakes your grave for a good place to sleep one off. Today, it's the baker's apprentice. He stands near the gate, pretending to be there on an errand, but his eyes keep flicking toward your shovel like it might tell a story. You ignore him, mostly, but you know that look. Curiosity and fear, braided together like a noose. You had it too once. When you were young and first handed the spade, awkward, unsure, terrified you'd dig too shallow or too deep or, God forbid, into someone already resting there, you learned fast. Not because someone taught you, but because the dead are patient and the living are not. Historians still argue whether graveyards were considered sacred ground in every village. Some say yes. Others argue it was just the priests say so that blessed the soil. You've never seen the blessing yourself, but you've seen how it's treated, with superstition more than sanctity. People walk faster when they pass. They whisper when they name the dead. They throw salt on your path when you leave the tavern. You don't mind. Salt keeps the ghosts polite. You lift another shovelful and find something unexpected, a scrap of cloth, buried deep, soaked, and stiff with time. You pause, not because it's rare, but because each one feels like an echo. A forgotten kerchief, a lost sleeve, the corner of a child's blanket that got left behind. You fold it neatly and place it on a nearby stone. That's your ritual. Don't take, don't bury twice. The apprentice finally musters the courage to approach. He stands at the edge of your work, hands clasped, looking like he's about to confess something. You nod to him. He blurts, "Is it true you once dug a grave for someone who wasn't dead yet?" You lean on the spade, wipe your brow with a sleeve streaked in brown. Then you say, "Only once." He doesn't laugh, just stares harder. You smile, slow and dry. She got better. He bolts. You chuckle, not because it's cruel, but because the truth is funnier than the lie. There was a woman, yes, who went still one winter's night. They wrapped her up and called the priest. But she twitched, that's all. A twitch in the eye before the final prayer. You'd already carved 3 feet into the earth. She went home the next day, lived another 6 years. The grave stayed open. It got filled a week later with her husband. No one asked questions. You return to your digging. The soil turns lighter here, yellowish and gritty, and you have to switch grips, twist your spine just so. A day of digging doesn't hurt until the next morning. That's the rule. Your body stores the pain like a miser counting coins. The bell in the church tower rings once. Not a funeral toll, just the hour. Still, it makes you flinch. Sound does that out here. It jumps from the stones and finds you even when you try to ignore it. You reach the proper depth, rest your shovel, and step back. A neat rectangle, as close to perfect as the ground allows. You nod to it, not in triumph, but in recognition. This one's ready. You line it with straw, tuck it into the corners, pat it down like you're preparing a bed, because you are. That's all a grave is, really, a bed with no waking. As you gather your tools, your eye catches movement, something quick and sharp at the edge of the church's outer wall. A fox, maybe, or a trick of the light. Either way, it leaves no trace, just like everything else. The path from the grave to the chapel is worn with your boots. Narrow, uneven, muddied in winter, and dusty in drought. You walk it now, wheelbarrow in tow, its wobbly front wheel complaining over every stone. The load today is modest. Clean boards, a mallet, 2 small pots of pitch. A simple coffin job. Nothing fancy. The chapel looms ahead, half-shadowed under the overhang of an ancient yew tree, whose roots you're convinced know all the secrets of this land. It's quiet today. No choir practice, no sermons echoing off the nave walls. Just the soft cooing of doves tucked into the roof eaves and the low, dry creak of the chapel door as you push it open. Inside, the scent hits first. Wax, old incense, dust, and damp wood. It's a comforting rot, if such a thing exists. You pull the wheelbarrow close to the vestry, where the wood for coffins is kept in tidy stacks against the wall. Some boards are warped, others split, but you know how to make them fit. Like the people they hold, they just need a little guidance. You begin sorting the usable planks, tapping each with a finger to check for hollowness. 1, 2, 3. 7 good boards. Enough for sides, a base, a lid. You always add a little extra to the sides if it's for a child. Not out of necessity, but gentleness. They deserve the space to stretch, even in death. As you hammer the pieces together, the chapel echoes back at you with every strike. A slow, resonant thud that folds into the stone and disappears. There's something deeply holy about this moment, even if no one sees it. Maybe especially because no one sees it. Historians still argue whether medieval coffins were reserved for the wealthy. Some say yes, others note the church offered wood for those who could not afford it. You've built boxes for knights and for beggars, and they all sound the same when nailed shut. You finish the box, seal the seams with pitch, and set it near the door for the pallbearers. It will be carried by 2 men you likely know by scent more than by name. Fishmongers, probably, or that cooper again if he's sober. Before you leave, you take a moment to light a stub of candle, not for ceremony, but for tradition. You whisper something, not a prayer exactly, but a wordless sound that might be mistaken for one. A murmur to keep the shadows respectful. Back outside, the wind is picking up. It smells like coming rain, like wet stone and mossy bark. You pull your cloak tighter and trudge back toward the cemetery, where your shovel waits loyally beside the newly dug grave. The birds are quieter now, as if they too feel the weight of what's coming. You hear footsteps, soft ones, crunching the gravel behind you. A priest? No, lighter. You turn and see a child. She's maybe 10, barefoot, with a smudge of dirt on her cheek and a bundle of wildflowers clenched in one fist. She doesn't speak, just points toward the grave. You nod. She places the flowers at its edge, clumsy and beautiful, then runs off without a word. You return to your work, kneeling to place the flowers properly. Roots down, blossoms up. It matters, you think. Not because the dead will notice, but because the living will. And maybe that's the whole point. The sky darkens slightly. Not quite storm, but the kind of heavy gray that pulls the world closer to the ground. You stand beside the grave, waiting for the procession that will come within the hour. Slow, steady, with murmured prayers and occasional sobs. Until then, you rest your hands on the spade's handle and breathe. In through your teeth. Out through your nose. Like always. The funeral procession crests the hill in slow motion. First comes the bell ringer, a boy too small for the job, clutching the iron tongue with both hands as he clangs out a rhythm older than memory. Behind him, 2 men carry the coffin with solemn effort, their shoulders hunched not just with weight but with thought. The priest, resplendent in his tattered robes of gold and ash, walks in silence, lips moving in a language that feels more murmured than spoken. And then the family. You see them before they see you. A woman in black, likely the sister or wife, walking beside an older man whose knees bow outward with age. 2 younger boys trail behind, heads down, kicking pebbles. You count them instinctively, 7 in total. Enough for a memory, not enough for a parade. You take your place beside the grave and nod as the procession nears. The priest makes the sign of the cross. You offer him a respectful half-bow. The coffin is lowered slowly into the cradle of earth you shaped with your own hands, and for a moment the only sound is the wind threading through the trees like a harp string drawn too tight. Then the priest begins. You've heard this prayer 100 times, 1,000, enough that it no longer feels like words, just sound stitched to sorrow. You let it wash over you, not out of piety, but because grief has its own weather, and you've learned not to stand in the way of rain. The sister begins to cry, not loud but sharp, like a quill snapped in ink. The boys watch her, unsure if they should cry too, or just wait. You've seen this before. Grief isn't contagious, it's inherited. One of the men reaches down, scoops up a handful of dirt, and tosses it onto the coffin. The sound is always the same. Hollow, final. You step forward next and begin to fill the grave. Each shovelful is placed with care. Not slow, never slow, but not rushed either. You don't slam, you don't dump. You pour the earth like wine into a glass, steady and sure. The boys whisper something to each other. The older one nudges the younger, who nods and steps forward with a pebble in his palm. He tosses it in, it clicks against the wood, and then he runs back. You want to say something, anything, but your voice belongs to the spade right now, and the spade speaks in dust and silence. Historians still argue whether children were encouraged to participate in burials during the medieval period. Some claim it was meant to steel them for life's hardships. Others suggest it was simply custom, neither cruel nor kind, just what was done. You know better. You've seen the way children look at the grave. Not with fear, but curiosity, like they're peeking through a window and wondering what's on the other side. You finish the burial just as the clouds break, not into rain, but light. A sliver of sun, reluctant but real, spills across the stones and the moss and the faces of the mourners. The sister wipes her cheek with the back of her hand and says something you don't catch. The priest closes his book with the careful reverence of someone who believes that even endings deserve a ritual. They begin to leave, one by one. The last to go is the old man, who lingers a moment at the foot of the grave. He pulls something from his coat, a crust of bread, hard as bone, and places it on the earth. A final meal, or maybe just a gesture. Either way, it matters. You wait until they're gone before brushing the dirt smooth and planting the wooden marker at the head of the grave. You press it in deep and tie a strip of white cloth around it. Not all graves get this, but some do, when it feels right. As you gather your tools, a breeze nudges the linen, making it flutter like a tiny flag. You nod once to no one and begin the walk back toward the tool shed. The spade clangs softly with each step. Behind you, the grave settles. Quietly, completely. And the work continues. You reach the tool shed at the far edge of the cemetery, a leaning structure cobbled together from reclaimed stone and leftover timber, its roof shingled with mismatched tiles like a jester's hat. The door groans as it opens, the sound half complaint, half welcome. It always feels cooler inside, even in summer, earth-scented and dry. You place the shovel in its place on the rack, the spade blade dark with clay and memory. Next to it hangs your mattock, its handle worn smooth from years of grip. Each tool has its place, and each bears the scars of honest work. They do not shine, but they serve. In the corner sits your whetstone. You sit beside it on the old three-legged stool and begin to hone the edge of your spade. The scraping sound is rhythmic, soothing, like breath on a quiet night. You sharpen not because it's dull, but because this is what you do. Maintenance is its own ritual. You can't bury the dead if your tools are blunt, just as you can't survive the work if your mind is. As you work, your thoughts drift. Not to the dead, but to the living, the ones who come and go with tears and coin, the ones who speak to you in whispers, if at all. You think of the blacksmith's boy who lost 3 siblings last winter and still brings you apples when he has them. Of the weaver who insists on paying you in buttons because she cannot part with coin. Of the monk who once asked if you ever dream of those you bury. You do, sometimes. Not nightmares, not quite. More like echoes. You hear voices in the corners of your sleep, laughter too quiet to identify, weeping that fades before it can be placed. You wake with dirt under your nails and the weight of a name you can't remember. Historians still argue whether gravediggers were respected or reviled. Some sources claim they were considered holy laborers, gatekeepers of the final passage. Others suggest they were shunned, paid little, and kept at a social distance almost as wide as the graves themselves. In your case, it's both. The priest respects you. The children fear you. The innkeeper undercharges you because you make her laugh. And the mayor? Well, the mayor's never looked you in the eye, but his wife once brought you a wool scarf in winter. It was green. You still wear it when the snow comes. You finish honing and return the spade to its hook. The shed feels especially still now, the kind of quiet that's too perfect, as if the walls themselves are listening. You light a stub of candle, more out of habit than need, and let it cast long shadows over the stone floor. The flame flickers against the tools, making them look like ghosts in mid-gesture, frozen in eternal readiness. On the wall opposite hangs a board with names carved in uneven lines. You started it years ago, when one too many graves went unmarked. Each name is carved in your own hand. No order, no family ties, just a record for those who might be forgotten. You trace one name now with your thumb, a line. Just that. No surname. She arrived in a storm and was gone by dawn. No one claimed her, but you couldn't bear to let her go unnamed. So she lives here, in the shed, with the rest. You close the door behind you and step back into the light. The cemetery is quiet again. No wind, no birds. Just you, the stones, and the uncut grass rippling like a sea caught mid-breath. You feel it then, that gentle ache in your lower back, the dull buzz in your wrists, the day's toll. You roll your shoulders, stretch your arms. You're not young anymore, but this is the kind of work that ages you on the inside first. You glance at the horizon. The sun has begun its descent. The sky paints itself in streaks of amber and wine. You still have one more grave to dig today, and it's in the far corner. A tough patch, roots and stones. No one likes that plot, but you do. It's quiet there, more foxes than people. You shoulder your sack of tools and head in that direction, boots crunching softly on the gravel path. The day isn't done, and neither are you. The far corner of the cemetery is a different kind of silence, thicker, more ancient. The trees here bend inward, their branches forming a twisted cathedral of bark and leaf. The light filters through in patches, as if uncertain whether to stay. Even the birds seem hesitant, their calls softer, more deliberate. You step between the crooked stones, some leaning like old men, others sunk so deep into the ground their inscriptions have long disappeared. You know them by heart, every name, every year. This is the oldest section, the ground packed with memory and root. You reach the designated plot. There's a faint marking from years past, an unclaimed grave that was never fully used. A collapse during a storm, perhaps, or a family that vanished before burial could be completed. The ground here is stubborn, rocky, root-woven. Digging here is a negotiation, not a task. You set down your tools, spade, pick, mattock. The first strike is always a test. You lean your weight into the blade, and it bites the soil with resistance. Earth gives way slowly, reluctant. A tangle of roots clings to every clump. You mutter something, half curse, half coax, and keep going. Each foot of depth comes with its own flavor. The upper layer is rich and loamy, still scented with moss and decay. Below that, the clay begins, sticky and coppery, the kind that clings to the spade like regret. Deeper still, the stones, flat ones that need prying, round ones that roll where they please. You wipe your brow, sweat already trickling into your collar. The sounds of digging become a rhythm. Dig, lift, toss, breathe, again. Your arms move like clockwork, the same motion repeated 1,000 times across 1,000 days. The grave takes shape slowly, like a thought becoming clear. You pause at the halfway mark, leaning on your spade. Your breath comes in fogged puffs despite the lingering warmth. You scan the trees, noting the ravens gathered above, 3 of them quiet, observant. Historians still argue whether ravens were seen as omens or protectors in cemeteries. Some medieval texts portray them as messengers of the dead. Others believe they simply liked the company of bones. You prefer the latter. It's easier that way. You resume digging. Eventually, the hole deepens to the right measure, 6 feet. Not for ceremony, but for safety, for the comfort of knowing the earth will keep its promise. You smooth the sides, pack the corners, test the base with your boot. Satisfied, you climb out and sit at the edge, letting your legs dangle over the side. There's something strangely peaceful about the view from here, like looking into a well of time. From your pouch, you pull a crust of bread, stale, hard, but enough. You eat in silence, watching the ravens shift their weight on the branch. One hops a little closer, eyeing you with a tilt of the head. You toss it a crumb. It does not thank you, but it stays. You finish your meal, wipe your hands on your trousers, and lower yourself back into the grave. This time, not to dig, but to carve a small sigil in the soil. A habit of yours. Just a mark. Nothing magical, nothing sacred. Just yours. A way to say you were here, that someone cared. You climb out, replace your tools in the sack, and dust off your hands. The wind has returned, carrying the scent of wet bark and cold stone. Evening comes fast in this corner. The sun doesn't linger. You sling the sack over your shoulder and begin the long walk back to the chapel. The ground beneath your boots is soft from recent rain, but you know each step by memory. You pass the stone with the broken cross, the one children say is cursed. You tip your hat to it, as always. Superstition is harmless, and besides, what if they're right? As you approach the newer graves, you hear a familiar sound, the scraping of a lute. The blind bard is back, seated near the chapel steps, strumming a slow, mournful tune that meanders like smoke. You nod to him, and he lifts his head slightly. "Rough ground today," he asks. You grunt, then smile. "Always." He chuckles, the sound like a rusted hinge. You sit beside him for a moment, neither of you speaking. The music fills the air, light as thread, weaving through gravestones and between memories. For a moment, you are not the gravedigger, just a man listening. Then, without a word, you rise and head inside. There is still cleaning to do. Inside the chapel, it's cool and dark, with the scent of beeswax and dust thick in the air. You light a taper from the embers still glowing in the iron brazier by the wall. The flame flickers to life, small but steady, casting its glow on stone and wood, revealing a world of worn pews and faded tapestries. You walk slowly, candle in hand, past the altar where the priest leaves his sermon notes, scratched Latin on parchment, rolled tight and tied with cord. The chapel has no grandeur, only history. Every beam was shaped by calloused hands, every stone hoisted with groans and sweat. You feel its age in your bones, a structure as weathered as your own back. You head toward the corner closet, your corner. The broom waits beside the basin, along with the rag that hasn't been new in a decade. You begin with the floor, sweeping from the altar outward. It's a rhythmic task, and your body responds instinctively. Back and forth, the bristles whisper across the flagstones like old secrets being brushed aside. There's a stain you'll never quite scrub out near the 5th row of pews. Candle wax and blood, though whose blood no one remembers anymore. Maybe it was the time the blacksmith's wife fainted during Lent, Or maybe the time a scuffle broke out during a wedding over a misthrown garter. Either way, the stone remembers. You dip the rag in water and begin to wipe the benches. Each one has its own personality. Some creak, some lean, some welcome you like an old friend. You hum as you work, an old tune with no words, passed down from your mother, something about sheep and stars and barley. Historians still argue whether gravediggers often assisted with chapel duties or were barred from such stasis due to their association with death. In your case, no one ever asked. You just started doing it, and the priest never stopped you. That's the thing about unspoken roles. They're the most stable. A spider watches you from the rafters. You nod to it. It does not return the gesture, but remains motionless, regal in its dusty throne. The sun outside has nearly set, casting long golden stripes across the chapel floor through the high windows. Dust motes dance in the beams like tiny souls unsure of where they belong. You move next to the candle table, replacing melted stubs with fresh tapers from the storage shelf. The ritual of it soothes you, the scraping of the wax, the aligning of wicks, the trimming with the little iron blade. You light a few of them now, letting their flames grow tall and bright. A small forest of fire flickering in the hush. You take a moment then, hands resting on the table, eyes half closed. There's comfort in routine, even if the world around you shift, even if the priest changes, or the bell breaks, or the mayor's rules tighten. The broom always sweeps. The grave always waits. The chapel always quiets you. Outside, the bard continues to play. The melody has shifted to something lighter, almost playful. You recognize it. It's the tune old drunkards hum when trying to remember where they left their shoes. It makes you smile. You step to the rear of the chapel, where the cleaning ends and the waiting begins. This is where families come to speak quietly before the burial, where decisions are made about flowers, cloth, and which hymn is least likely to make the widow cry again. You straighten the chairs. You fold the drape. You place the empty basin on the table. You prepare, not for a guest, but for a goodbye. As the candlelight dances on your face, you realize the ache in your arms has dulled. It's been replaced by something gentler. Fatigue, yes, but also something else. A kind of earned stillness, the quiet after honest work. You blow out the taper, one breath, and let darkness settle back into the chapel's corners. The bard's tune ends. Night falls. You step out into it. Outside, the sky has deepened to a velvet blue, stars pushing through like pricked stitches in a great celestial quilt. The moon is low and soft tonight, a waning crescent barely strong enough to cast shadows. The chapel door closes behind you with a hollow clunk, and you pause for a moment just to listen. No wind, no birds, just the slow, persistent rasp of the bard's fingers across worn lute strings, like an old man whispering to himself. You nod to him again as you pass. He stopped playing, now resting his chin on the curve of his instrument, as though it might warm him. You don't speak. Words feel too sharp for this hour. Instead, you offer him the last heel of bread from your pouch, and he takes it with a nod of thanks so slight it could have been a blink. You head toward your quarters, the little hut tucked behind the tool shed, half hidden under the boughs of a bent yew tree. It's nothing grand, but it keeps the rain off your shoulders and the frost from your beard. The door creaks open, hinges complaining like an elder woken too soon. Inside, you light the stub of a beeswax candle from the one you carried back from the chapel. The flame jumps, casting long shadows that make your walls look bigger than they are. The room is a collection of necessities: a cot, a table, a stool, a hook for your coat. Everything in its place, and nothing that doesn't serve. You hang your cloak by the hearth and rub your shoulders. A basin of water waits in the corner. You splash your face, the cold biting enough to make you exhale sharply. Then, with damp fingers, you pull off your boots, one, then the other, and let out a groan you didn't mean to. The cot welcomes you like an old friend. The mattress is straw-filled and stubborn, but familiar. You sit, stretch your legs, and then reach for the tin cup beside your bed. The mead inside is lukewarm and probably older than it should be, but it tastes of honey and memories. You sip slowly. This is the part of the day where the dead fall away and the living returns. You think of the baker's apprentice, the one who always gives you the broken biscuits at closing. You think of the washerwoman who brings flowers on the third Thursday of every month for no one in particular. You think of the mayor's wife and her scarf. Then you think of the grave you dug today. You wonder who will fill it. You haven't been told yet. Might be tomorrow, might be a week. But someone will come, eventually, with a name and a reason, and the hole you made will become a resting place, final, silent, necessary. Historians still argue whether the role of the gravedigger included ceremonial duties, or if those were reserved for clergy alone. Some texts suggest a few gravediggers were also local singers or chanters, entrusted to whisper the last words for those too poor to afford a priest. You like that idea. It feels human. You lean back, letting your head rest against the wall behind your cot. The candle burns low, its glow barely touching the far corners of the room. The shadows begin to stretch out, long and strange, like limbs caught mid-reach. You close your eyes and let your ears take over. A night bird calls. A dog barks twice from the village below. The bard strums one final note. Then, silence. You smile, just a little, because you know tomorrow will begin again. The tools will wait, the chapel will breathe, the grave will deepen, and you will rise, same as always. Not because someone tells you to, but because it is what you do, what you've always done. Outside, the stars pulse faintly, each one a distant bell rung in reverse. You set your cup down gently, blow out the candle, and lay back on the cot. The room fades, the night thickens, and the silence wraps you like wool.
You wake before dawn, not because you must, but because your bones insist. They keep time better than any church bell. The sky outside your shutter is still more ink than blue, and the air inside your hut carries a chill that snakes up your spine as you sit upright and stretch. You swing your feet onto the floor and press your heels against the cold stone. There's something strangely invigorating about that first contact, like the earth reminding you it's still there, still waiting. The hearth is dead, so you strike a flint and coax the coals back to life. Sparks flicker, catch, and soon the room glows with the soft, uneven light of a reluctant fire. You warm your hands above it, knuckles cracked and rough, etched with soil and years. You dress slowly, layer by layer, wool over linen, leather boots still damp from yesterday. You wrap your belt with care. Hanging from it are the smaller tools, trowel, bone knife, a worn wooden rosary you never use for prayer but keep for balance. Breakfast is a thin porridge, mostly oats, a bit of dried apple, and the last hint of cinnamon you've been hoarding since Michaelmas. You eat in silence, spoon scraping against the bowl, steam curling up to fog your lashes. Then it's time. Outside, the frost clings to every blade of grass, turning the cemetery into a patchwork of silver and shadow. The stones sparkle faintly in the moonlight, like old teeth smiling in the dark. You cross the yard toward the eastern gate, where the burial cart is kept. It's not elegant. 2 wheels, 1 axle, a bed of rough planks, and a canvas tarp. But it rolls well, and that's enough. You check the wheels, oil the joints, and tie the tarp back neatly. A knock at the chapel door catches your attention. The priest, younger than most expect, greets you with a nod. He carries a folded paper with wax seal cracked open. There's no need for words. You know that look. A pauper, he says, almost apologetically. No family, just the cloth merchant who found her. You nod. There's no scorn in the role. The forgotten need burying just as much as the titled, sometimes more.
You take the slip of paper, her name, birth, guessed, cause of death, listed as wasting, and her parish. Then you ready the cart. By now, dawn has cracked the horizon, and the frost is loosening its grip on the grass. Mist curls low, hugging the gravestones, trailing behind your boots as you push the cart down the path toward the back gate. At the city's edge, a small form lies beneath a sheet beside the stables. The merchant bows slightly as you approach. He doesn't speak, but his eyes say enough. Grief, duty, a dash of relief. He's done his part. You check the sheet, just to be sure. A girl, no more than 20. Thin, pale, hands folded over a bit of linen. Someone cared, at least a little. You lift her gently. She weighs nothing. You settle her in the cart, cover her again, and turn back toward the hill. The mist thickens as you walk, muffling the world into silence. The cart creaks, a steady beat in the quiet morning. Historians still argue whether the term gravedigger included duties like body retrieval or whether that fell to beadles or monks. In your experience, when no one else is willing, it becomes your role by default. As you return to the gates, the chapel bell tolls softly, just one ring. A signal. Someone is passing. You nod as you enter the grounds, guiding the cart along the worn path to the plot you dug the day before. The earth looks different in the morning, less ominous, more forgiving. The grave you prepared waits, patient and still. You pull back the tarp, lift the body once more, and ease it into place with care. There's no ceremony today, just a whisper. Rest. You sprinkle a handful of dirt in first, out of habit. Then you begin to cover her, one shovel of soil at a time. The sound is heavy, muted, final. No one watches, but you work as if they do. Dignity doesn't require witnesses. By the time you've packed the last mound, the sun is up fully, bathing the cemetery in gold. The frost is gone. The mist has fled. And somewhere nearby, a bird begins to sing. You replace your tools in the cart, wipe your brow, and stand in silence. It's only mid-morning, but your day has already carried the weight of a life. You lean on the handle of your spade, gaze drifting across the cemetery. The morning light has shifted the mood entirely. What was shrouded in mist just moments ago now gleams in dew and sunshine. The gravestones stretch long shadows across the ground, like they're reaching for something. Maybe warmth, maybe memory. You begin the slow walk toward the tool shed, wheels of the cart trundling behind you. It's not far, but the earth is still soft from last week's rain, and the weight of the cart makes each step a careful one. The grave you just filled rests in your peripheral vision, and you resist the urge to look back again. There's a small satisfaction in knowing her name, Marjolaine. Most paupers don't arrive with that. You let it tumble around your thoughts for a while, like a river stone getting polished. At the shed, you lift the shovel from the cart and place it on the hooks along the far wall. Everything in this shed has a place. The rake, the short-handled spade, the scythe that hasn't seen use in months. It's your version of a chapel, wood and iron instead of incense and icons. You grab a cloth and wipe down the handles. Tools last longer when they're loved, and yours are very, very old friends. Just as you close the shed door, you hear the faint squeak of the gate. It's not the priest, his steps are heavier, nor the washerwoman, she hums when she walks. You peek around the corner. It's the mayor's steward. You sigh inwardly. He waves at you like you might be hard of hearing, then picks his way across the grass in his soft leather boots, careful not to stain them. He's holding a scroll, which means trouble, or at the very least, extra work. New rules, he says, not even agreeing. You nod. Of course there are. He unrolls the parchment and reads in his nasal lilt. Something about spacing between graves. Something about stone measurements. Something about requiring wooden markers for unnamed paupers. It's all barked out like law, though you know full well the mayor won't fund the wood. So, he finishes, I'll expect you to begin adjusting accordingly. You stare at him for a long moment. Then nod again, slowly. He doesn't seem to notice your silence, or maybe he mistakes it for respect. He trots off without another word, boots still clean, scroll tucked beneath his arm like a child's drawing. Historians still argue whether gravediggers were considered part of municipal staff or church staff. The truth, of course, depends on who's paying and who's pretending not to notice. You don't mind the ambiguity. It means no one quite knows how to manage you, which means they mostly leave you alone. You spend the rest of the morning adjusting the day's schedule. You'll have to move the markers on the south edge, dig one plot 2 feet over, remark the twins' grave from last winter, and now, apparently, build wooden slats for Marjolaine. You sigh. But only once. Then you grab the saw and the wood pile. It's all scraps, old table legs, broken carts, and the discarded edge of a bed frame. But you know how to shape it. You work under the yew tree, sawing slowly, letting the rhythm calm you. The smell of wood shavings mixes with the faint aroma of damped earth and crushed grass. A blackbird hops nearby, tilting its head as if judging your craftsmanship. By midday, the marker is done. Nothing fancy, just her name, carved in blocky letters, and the date scratched in below. You press your thumb into the groove, feeling the shape of each line. It's real now. You walk it to her grave and place it carefully at the head, pushing it deep into the soil until it stands upright. A little crooked, but firm, like most things in life. You step back and fold your arms. For a moment, the cemetery feels utterly still. No breeze, no footsteps, just sun on stone and one gravedigger watching over his flock. You wonder how many you've buried. You stopped counting years ago. Not out of sorrow, just practicality. Numbers don't matter the way names do. And names whisper long after voices fade. You whisper hers once more. Then turn back toward the shed. The afternoon calls. There are more graves to mark, more tools to sharpen, and always, always, more quiet to carry.
The sun hangs at a crooked angle now, casting long amber streaks through the trees as you return to the work table beneath the yew. The breeze carries the faint scent of old nettles and distant hearth fires. Somewhere in the village, a bell rings, not a chapel bell, but a baker's, probably signaling that the rye is out of the oven. Your stomach growls, but you ignore it. There's still a task to finish, another marker to carve, this one for a child whose name you never learned. You select a piece of wood, lighter than oak, but sturdy, likely a floorboard in its past life. You run your hand over it, checking for splinters. Then, with practiced ease, you begin carving. The letters are simple. Here lies a soul remembered. No name, no date. Just the hope that someone might pause and wonder. You work slowly, rhythmically, letting your mind wander. This is when the memories come easiest. Not grand memories, but small ones. Like the time you saw a rat sneak bread from a bishop's sleeve mid-sermon. Or the time a noble insisted on being buried with his falcon, only for the bird to fly off mid-procession. The absurdity of death never stops surprising you. Historians still argue whether common grave markers in medieval cemeteries were the domain of gravediggers or stonemasons. In your case, you took over simply because no one else did. First with sticks, then slats, and now, thanks to a growing pile of discarded furniture, you've got enough wood to outlast a dozen edicts from the mayor. You finish the carving and lean back, rolling your shoulders. The light is fading faster now. Golden threads retreat behind the chapel roof, and the graveyard is settling into that early evening hush, the kind that feels respectful, even from the crows. With the marker in hand, you make your way toward the southern slope, where the child is buried. It's a modest corner of the cemetery, older, more shaded, where moss has conquered most of the stones. You like it here.
The quiet here is softer, less ceremonial. The trees watch without judgment. You find the grave easily. You dug it only last week. A small mound, neatly tamped down, a single stone placed at the head. You press the wooden marker into the soil beside it and adjust it until it feels right. There's no formula for these things, only instinct. Then, almost without realizing it, you kneel. You're not a praying man, not really, but you do have your rituals. You lay one hand on the soil and the other over your chest. You breathe in, hold, release. You whisper, "You're not alone." And for a moment, you believe it. When you rise again, the world is darker. The trees have swallowed the last of the light, and mist is beginning to gather at your ankles. You walk slowly back toward your hut, the path familiar beneath your feet. At the shed, you store your tools again, carefully, deliberately. Your fingers are stiff, and your knees protest with each bend, but you don't rush. Respect lives in small gestures, in clean blades, in doors closed gently. You return to your quarters and light the fire again. This time, it catches faster. You sit by it, warming your hands, letting the heat chase the chill from your spine. Dinner is bread, hard cheese, and a bit of pickled onion. You eat without ceremony, listening to the crackle of the fire and the wind tracing its fingers along your shutter. Then, from outside, a sound. Footsteps. You rise, peering through the slat in your door. A boy, no older than 10, is standing at the edge of your walkway. He clutches something in both hands, a cloth bundle. You step outside. He doesn't flinch. "Is it true?" he asks. You blink. Is what true? That the gravedigger knows every soul by name? You smile, just a little. "Only the ones who whisper theirs to me." He stares a moment longer. Then, slowly, he unwraps the cloth. Inside, a dead bird, a sparrow, feathers smoothed, eyes closed, tiny, perfect. "She was my friend," he says. Can you bury her?" Your throat tightens. You nod. "Of course." You take the bundle carefully and motion for him to follow. Lantern in hand, you lead him to the western edge of the graveyard, where the hill crests and the wind carries songs from the village square. You dig a small hole, just deep enough. You place the bird inside. The boy watches, silent. Then you cover it, press the earth down, and without being asked, the door creaks shut behind you as you return, lantern extinguished and your breath curling into the chill that's settled in. The fire is a low glow now, coals rather than flame, but enough to warm your fingers as you kneel beside it. You think of the boy and his bird. You've buried nobles with less ceremony, kings even, though none you'd name. Their coffins were heavier, their crowds larger, but their deaths somehow quieter, less felt. There's something honest about a child's grief. It doesn't seek explanation, it just is. You let the silence stretch. It's a companion now, not a burden. You pull a small ledger from the shelf above your cot. Its cover is cracked leather, and the pages inside are a medley of script and smudge drawn in your hand over the years. Not for accounting, not for records demanded by the mayor, but for your own sort of keeping. You open to a blank page and, with a stub of charcoal, write, "Sparrow, carried by a boy in silence, buried westward where the sun lingers longest, pebble marker, wings folded." Then close the book. Historians still argue whether medieval gravediggers maintained personal records. Most didn't, officially. But oral accounts suggest some, like you, held their own logics, their own memorials, because not all stories are carved in stone. The wind shifts again, rustling the thatch overhead. A sign, perhaps, or just the world reminding you it's still there. You stretch, joints popping like old gate hinges, and begin preparing for tomorrow. There's a funeral scheduled at dawn, a merchant woman this time, known for her fig preserves and her habit of correcting priests mid-sermon. You smiled when the priest told you, not at her death, but at the idea that even in eulogy she'd be interrupting. You set out your tools, sharpen the spade, rub wax into the handle, check the length of the measuring rope twice, then coil it neatly. The dead don't mind crooked plots, but the living take it as a personal insult. Once, early in your career, a noble's nephew had berated you for placing the tomb 3 inches too far west. His spirit won't find peace if the sun doesn't rise on his right side, he insisted. You'd nodded, redrawn the wap, and redug the hole. Later that night, you turned the stone east, just out of spite. The next morning, a bird dropped something unpleasant right on the nephew's wig during the service. You considered it a small act of divine solidarity. You lay down now, boots still on, blanket rough but warm. Your cot creaks familiarly beneath you. Eyes drift closed. But sleep is a guest who arrives when it pleases. So your mind wanders. You recall the plague years, how fast the graves filled then. You remember the ache in your shoulders that never fully left. And the bells, oh, the bells, so many. Some nights you still hear them. Back then, you'd dig until your hands blistered, sleep an hour, then return to the rows. They stopped using coffins halfway through, just shrouds, then bundles, then nothing at all. You kept digging. When it finally slowed, the quiet was louder than the bells. They gave you a medal once. It was tin, bent at the edge. You used it to patch a leak in the shed roof. You turn over now, letting the cot groan beneath your weight. The fire's gone out entirely, just a red-orange glow, like an eye blinking slowly. You tuck the blanket tighter and let the darkness settle over you, thick and soft. Outside, the cemetery sighs, stones cooled by night dew, trees whispering old names, grass growing by inches. Tomorrow, another grave, another name, or maybe none at all. You'll still remember. You always do. The morning greets you with a nudge rather than a shove, a thin thread of light curling through the gap in your shutter, and the muffled caw of a crow already debating with the wind. You stretch beneath the coarse wool blanket, joints cracking like a warning bell, then sit up slowly, listening for the comforting pop of your knees. There it is. You dress in layers, linen shirt, thick wool tunic, the same belt you've had since your second winter digging graves. The buckle is a little bent. You like it that way. Predictable, like the rhythm of a shovel in loam. Today's burial is set for mid-morning. That gives you time to prep the site. You gather your tools, sling the canvas over your shoulder, and step outside. The air is sharp, but the frost hasn't bitten yet. Good digging weather. You make your way toward the northern plot, where the merchant woman will rest. A larger grave, as expected. She'd sold lace and honeyed figs from the corner of the market, and rumor had it she once refused to pay a bishop until he explained the difference between divine providence and dumb luck. You respected her for that. The spot she's been given lies near the older crypts, just beside a holly bush that seems intent on surviving absolutely everything. It's a good place, morning light, decent drainage, and a small view of the chapel tower through the trees. You mark the edges with string and begin the dig. Historians still argue whether medieval gravediggers were required to follow precise burial measurements or if improvisation was the norm. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between. Follow the rules until they get in the way, then quietly ignore them. The soil here is stubborn, denser, a touch of clay. You mutter to it like an old friend who's forgotten how to be helpful. "Come on now," you grunt. "We've done this dance before." You fall into rhythm. Lift, toss, breathe. Lift, toss, breathe. A robin watches you from a nearby gravestone, fluffed against the cold. head tilted like it's judging your form. "I'd like to see you dig a 6-foot hole with no opposable thumbs," you mutter. The bird doesn't reply. About halfway down, you strike a root, thick, coiled like an old man's fist. You kneel and begin sawing it away with your blade, each pull slow and deliberate. It smells of sap and the past. When it finally breaks, you sit back and rest, wiping your brow on a sleeve already stained from a dozen forgotten yesterdays. You hear them before you see them, the clink of bridles, the shuffling of boots. The mourners are arriving. You climb from the grave and brush off your knees, standing beside the open earth as they approach. A modest procession, 10, maybe 12 people, all dressed in dark, with expressions ranging from solemn to politely blank. The priest leads, of course. He nods at you but doesn't speak. You nod back. Words aren't always necessary. They gathered around the grave, murmuring in that soft hush people adopt when they're pretending not to be cold. The casket is modest but well made. Walnut, perhaps. A few sprigs of rosemary tucked beneath the handles. A small, stitched pillow beneath her folded hands. You admire the work. Some carpenter, somewhere, took his time. The priest begins. You stand still, one hand on the spade, one foot just behind the other, weight balanced. You've done this dance 100 times. The words float over you, blessings and hope, ashes and dust, the usual comforts in lyrical Latin. You don't catch every phrase, but the tone is familiar. One mourner begins to cry, quietly, into a lace handkerchief. The others shift uncomfortably. You watch the ground. You always do. Eventually, the words stop. They lower her slowly. And then, all eyes fall to you. You step forward and begin to cover her. Each shovelful is a heartbeat, a rhythm, a lullaby for the last sleep. There is grace in the act, even if no one sees it. You smooth the top, pack the earth down, and place the single stone at her head, temporary until someone decides what she's worth in marble. You nod once, and the crowd begins to drift away. Quiet footsteps over frosted grass. The priest lingers a moment longer, then joins them. You remain, because someone always should. You pick up the rosemary that had fallen from the casket, press it into the soil like a promise. Then turn back toward your shed. Another grave waits tomorrow. But today, she rests well. The path back to your quarters crunches beneath your boots, each step sinking just slightly into the dew-wet earth. You carry your spade like a knight would a sword, though it's never been polished, and the nicks along the handle outnumber your teeth. The rosemary scent still lingers on your gloves. You pass the row of freshly dug graves from the past month. Small mounds, modest stones, and one particularly lopsided cross that refuses to stay upright no matter how many times you hammer it back in. You pause, nudge it with your foot, then move on. Inside, the fire's been out long enough to chill the room. You don't bother relighting it. Instead, you sit by the window, unwrap a heel of bread from a cloth napkin, and chew slowly as you stare out across the cemetery. The wind carries whispers today, nothing eerie, just the kind that stirs ivy and creaks loose shutters. You lean back, balancing the chair on 2 legs, and let the hum of the afternoon lull you into a gentle daze. Your mind drifts to the first time you handled a burial alone. You were 16. The master digger had broken his leg, and no one else in the village knew which end of the spade went into the ground. So they handed you the job, patted your shoulder, and promised a warm bowl of stew if you didn't mess it up too badly. The man you buried was a tanner. His hands were like leather, even in death. You'd never seen someone so still. You remember how heavy the soil felt, how the silence stretched until your heartbeat was louder than the crows overhead. You did the job. And after the last stone was laid, someone pressed a coin into your palm. You'd kept it for years, until a baker's daughter convinced you warm cinnamon rolls were a better use of money. You never regretted it. Historians still argue whether medieval graveyards were as formalized as modern ones, or if many were simple fields scattered with stones and memory. You'd argue that it didn't matter. A grave was a grave. Whether under an oak or beside a chapel, the purpose was the same: to hold what once was and give the living somewhere to remember. You rise from your chair now, bones protesting like stubborn gate hinges. Outside, the light is shifting again, late afternoon, the kind of gold that makes even weeds look holy. There's one more errand today. A widow from the southern hamlet sent word this morning. Her husband died during the night, and she wants him buried on the hill where he used to watch the sheep. It's not technically in the cemetery, but you've never been particularly loyal to boundaries. You gather your tools again, sling the sack over your shoulder, and begin the walk. The southern hill isn't far, but it's steeper than it looks, and the grass is slick from last night's rain. You huff as you climb, muttering about knees and age and how no one appreciates a flat graveyard anymore. When you reach the crest, the view nearly knocks the breath from your chest. Fields stretch like patchwork below, dotted with sheep, barns, and the distant smudge of chimney smoke. You can see the curve of the river, the glint of the town bell tower, and even the faint shape of your own shed if you squint just right. You set your bag down, pace out the rectangle, and begin to dig. The soil here is loose, easy, as if the hill knows and approves. The widow arrives an hour later, a small cart pulled by an even smaller donkey. She steps down carefully, hands trembling slightly, and nods at you. No words needed. You help her lift the shrouded body from the cart. He's light, all bone and memory, and you lower him gently into the earth. She sprinkles a handful of dried lavender over his chest, then steps back. You fill the grave with slow, even shovelfuls, and when you're done, she places a single smooth stone at his head. No name, no date. Everyone knew him, she says softly. You nod, then you offer her your arm for the descent. Back at the base of the hill, she turns to you and says, "Thank you for letting him watch the sheep again." You tip your hat. The sheep don't seem to mind.
You take the long route home, letting the twilight settle gently across your shoulders like a familiar wool cloak. The air carries that peculiar edge, part smoke, part damp moss, part the memory of things left unsaid. Somewhere in the trees to your left, an owl hoots, soft and slow, like punctuation for the day. Your boots crunch over the pebble-strewn path, each step grounding you deeper in the rhythm you've walked for decades. You pause at the gate to the cemetery, resting a hand on the rough-hewn post. It leans a little more every season, but you can't bring yourself to fix it. That lean has history. Inside the gate, you make your rounds, not because anyone told you to, simply because it's what you do. A tilt of the headstone here, a bunch of withered flowers removed there. You write a toppled candle left by some grieving daughter, its wax now a solid lump hugging the soil. The dead are quiet neighbors, but they still appreciate tidiness. You reach the far western edge of the grounds, where the really old ones lie. No names remain on these stones, just worn carvings and the occasional stubborn lichen clinging on like it's got nowhere else to be. Here, the air feels heavier, but not in a bad way, just thick with stories. You sit on the low wall that separates the cemetery from the forest. Not much of a wall anymore, just a crumbling line of moss and memory. From here, you can see the entire plot, spread out beneath the fading light like a patchwork quilt stitched by time and sorrow. You breathe deeply. Then you laugh, not loud, just a small, surprised chuckle. Because you remember the time the baker's dog got into the chapel during a funeral and stole the priest's satchel, ran 3 laps around the congregation before anyone could stop it. The widow had laughed so hard she snorted, which made everyone else laugh too, and for a moment the grief cracked open just enough to let some sunlight in. Historians still argue whether medieval funerals were always somber affairs or if laughter was more common than we think. You know the answer. Grief is heavy,
But humor, like a well-timed sneeze, always finds a way in. The shadows are longer now. Time to head back. As you walk past the row of paupers' graves, you pause and whisper a few names under your breath. Names others have forgotten, but you've kept. Not because you must, but because someone should. You think of the ledger on your shelf, your quiet act of remembrance. Maybe one day someone will find it, maybe not, but it will have mattered, in its own strange way. Back in your quarters, you light a small oil lamp and warm your hands over it. Your fingers ache more these days, tools feel heavier, the wind cuts sharper. But you wouldn't trade this life for anything. You sit again at the window, chewing a corner of stale bread and sipping from a chipped mug of something herbal that claims to help joints. You're not sure it works, but it tastes like pine and old books, which is oddly comforting. You catch your reflection in the window, blurred, ghost-like in the lamp's glow. Still here, you say aloud, to yourself, to the night, to whoever might be listening. You glance toward the cemetery one last time. All is still. The trees whisper their goodnights. The stones rest in place. And so, eventually, do you.
Morning again, though the sun rises slower in these late autumn weeks. You wake before it, as always. The chill has crept deeper into your bones overnight, and your joints grumble as you swing your legs over the side of the bed. Still, there's a kind of peace in this repetition, a rhythm to your days as steady as the toll of a chapel bell. Today is market day. Not for you, really. You've little use for bolts of cloth or gooseberry wine. But market day means more people moving about, more gossip to overhear, and, if you're lucky, a small parcel of cheese in the basket left on your doorstep by the tanner's wife. She still remembers you helped dig her sister's grave, even after 7 winters. You pull on your thick cloak, forest green, though you suspect it used to be something brighter. The hem is patched in 3 places, 4 if you count the inside. It smells faintly of rosemary and damp stone. Before heading into town, you stop by the chapel. Not for prayer, really, though you nod politely to the crucifix. Mostly, you check in with the priest. He's already up, polishing the candlesticks with a rag that's probably older than both of you. He looks up and nods. 2 burials next week, he says simply. You grunt in reply, jot a note into the ledger you carry in your coat pocket, and the conversation ends there. Words aren't necessary when death is the common tongue. You meander through the edge of town, passing stalls just being set up, baskets of eggs, folded linens, wheels of cheese stacked like pale suns. The butcher's boy tips his cap at you. The seamstress pretends not to notice you, though you know she's the one who left you that hand-knit pair of socks last year. Bright blue, utterly impractical. You wore them until the toes gave out. And there, nestled between the fishmonger and the man selling dubious apples, stands a small crooked sign, Books and Oddments. You duck inside, not because you read much these days, your eyes prefer real shadows to ink ones, but because you like the smell. Dust and leather and ink, the comforting scent of thoughts made tangible. The shopkeep is a wiry man with spectacles that make his eyes look like boiled eggs. He offers you a nod, then returns to his task of alphabetizing scrolls that haven't been touched in years. You drift to the back, where the miscellaneous shelf lives, a gloriously disorganized collection of forgotten treatises and cookbooks with recipes for ingredients no one can identify anymore. One thin volume catches your eye, The Proper Disposal of Sinful Bones. You raise an eyebrow. The subtitle claims to be A Treatise on Burial, Purification, and the Prevention of Grave Curses. You chuckle, lightly. Historians still argue whether medieval folks truly believed in grave curses, or if such fears were a convenient excuse to avoid digging at night. You'd wager both are true. You tuck the book under your arm and leave a coin on the counter. The shopkeep doesn't look up. Back home, you sit by the hearth, legs outstretched, book in lap. The pages are brittle, but the script is neat.
It begins with a rather dramatic warning about desecration of final rest. You pause, glance out the window toward your tidy rows of graves. You think they'd approve. A knock startles you. At the door stands a young man, breathless, hat clutched in nervous fingers. "Sir," he says, "my cousin's died." You nod, stepping aside so he can come in from the cold. He rattles off the details: age, manner of death, preferred burial plot. You scribble them into your ledger. When he finishes, he hesitates. Will she be safe?" he asks. "You know, from spirits?" You smile, just a little. "As safe as anyone," you reply. He leaves lighter than he arrived. You pull the blanket over your knees and open the book again, settling deeper into the chair. Outside, the wind picks up. A shutter creaks. You whisper under your breath, "No spirits tonight, please. I'm reading."
The clouds roll in early this morning, thick and pewter-colored, sagging low like woolen blankets soaked in mist. You glance skyward as you lace up your boots, already guessing the shoveling will be messier than usual. Rain softens the earth, yes, but it also makes for a slog through half-frozen muck, and let's not even start on the blisters. Still, there's a job to do. Today's burial is a woman from the orchard village, brought down yesterday by a fever that the apothecary swore was just a touch of bile imbalance. Touch your left boot. She was gone in a week. Sometimes the bile's got more bite than people admit. You wrap your scarf twice around your neck, pull your hood low, and head for the tool shed. It smells faintly of iron and old turnips, the result of a barrel stored poorly and long forgotten. Your spade hangs in its usual place, polished not by care but by decades of use. You heft it over your shoulder like an old friend, or an old enemy. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. The plot lies just past the eastern elm, near the low stone wall where lichen grows thick and green as sea moss. You begin to dig. The first few inches are easy, just soft mud and roots that squirm reluctantly from your blade. But deeper down, the soil clumps and clings like it's trying to hold on to its secrets. The wind picks up, flinging stray leaves into your eyes, and somewhere in the distance, a raven complains. You talk to the dirt as you dig, not aloud, just mentally, a habit you picked up long ago. Let go, you murmur in your mind. It's not for you to keep. By the time you reach depth, your back is soaked, your hands are trembling, and your beard has started collecting its own ecosystem of raindrops. You stand at the edge of the grave and look down. There's something humbling about that hole. Doesn't matter whose name is scrawled on the parchment. The hole looks the same for a barmaid, a knight, a baker, a thief. All roads, as they say, lead here. Historians still argue whether medieval gravediggers were considered noble in their own strange way, or merely tolerated as necessary. You've had people look at you both ways, some with pity, some with respect. You stopped caring sometime around your 30th funeral. The cart arrives mid-morning, pulled by a mule with a limp and driven by the deceased woman's nephew, a boy of no more than 14, all elbows and red-rimmed eyes. He tries to be strong. You admire that. Together, you lower the shrouded form into the earth. The boy tosses in a sprig of thyme. You nod and begin to fill the grave, slowly, evenly, like always. It begins to rain in earnest now. Not a drizzle, a full, soaking deluge that drips down your nose and slithers between your shoulder blades. You keep shoveling. Afterwards, the boy hands you a small satchel. "She would have wanted you to have this," he mumbles. Inside is a wedge of goat's cheese, a scrap of embroidery shaped like a daisy, and a note in careful, curling script. "Thank you for your kindness with the old graves. They always looked peaceful." You swallow hard, but say nothing. You're not great with thank yous. Dirt, sure. Bones, absolutely.
Emotions? Not your strongest shovel. The boy leaves, boots squelching down the hill. You stand there a moment longer. Then, slowly, you crouch and press the daisy embroidery into the fresh soil. "Welcome home," you whisper. The rain agrees.
The storm keeps on through the night. You don't sleep much, just drift in and out, half listening to the rhythm of the rain tapping on the roof like an impatient visitor. Your dreams are scattered. Something about a goat wearing boots, something else about a choir of frogs arguing over a hymn. You've long since stopped trying to decode your subconscious. It's got a sense of humor all its own. By morning, the cemetery is a puddle-dotted quilt of browns and grays. Mud sucks at your boots as you cross to the chapel. The bell rope is slick and cold in your hands as you give it one long pull. It echoes out over the hills, low, slow, and heavy. A sound that says, someone new is resting here. You light a taper for the departed, not because you believe it helps guide souls or anything, but because it's a quiet thing, a way to mark presence, like a signature made of wax and flame. Later, with the morning chores done and no fresh messages at the chapel door, you find yourself seated under the oak near the fence line, sharpening the edge of your spade. Not for show. A dull spade is a dangerous spade, more liable to bounce and bruise than cut clean. Your fingers work the whetstone in slow, practiced strokes. The rasping sound blends into the wind and the occasional caw of crows in the distance. Then you hear it. Laughter. Children's laughter. You peer over the fence. Down by the stream, two boys are launching twigs like boats and arguing about which one's fastest. Their laughter floats up like chimney smoke, light and unbothered. It reminds you of when you first came here. You were no older than them when your father handed you your first shovel, said, "Don't think of it as digging graves. Think of it as helping people find where they belong." You didn't quite understand then. You still don't, always. But some days it feels true. One of the boys slips on the moss and falls into the shallows with a yelp. The other bursts into wheezing giggles. The fallen boy stands, drenched but triumphant, lifting a waterlogged shoe like it's a trophy. You smile. Historians still argue whether medieval children were raised with more hardship than joy, or if simplicity gave them more room to play. Watching these two, you'd wager joy finds its way in, no matter the era. You remember a story once told to you by the village mason, how a child once snuck into a freshly dug grave and pretended to be a ghost to scare his older sister. It worked. She screamed so loud she frightened herself into hiccups for a week. The tale made the rounds for months, each telling more elaborate than the last. By midday, the sky clears for a brief hour. You use the break in weather to tidy the fresh grave. You press down the soil with your boots, add a simple wooden marker, and tuck the embroidery flower gently beneath it. It looks right there, peaceful. Back inside, you heat up a small pot of stew, mostly root vegetables, a bit of barley, and just enough salt to remind your tongue it's food. You eat slowly, chewing each bite with the measured patience of someone who has nowhere else to be. After lunch, you sort the burial ledgers. Each page bears the quiet burden of lives now gone. Some entries are long, dates, family names, occupations. Others are heartbreakingly short. Child, no name, winter. Still, you record them all with the same care. Not because someone told you to, but because, in a world where so much is forgotten, being remembered feels sacred. You add the orchard woman's name to the list. You write, soft hands, kind eyes, daisy stitch. Then you set the book aside, lean back, and close your eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to breathe. Outside, the last drops of rain fall from the eaves like tiny, tired farewells.
By the time dusk unfurls its bruised purple ribbon across the sky, you're already at the north corner of the grounds, examining a patch of stubborn thistle that's trying to reclaim a long-forgotten boundary. You squat low, fingers brushing moss-covered stones. The names here are almost gone, worn down to vague ridges by time and wind. The oldest graves in the yard. No one comes to visit them anymore, but you do. You clear the thistles carefully, muttering your apologies to both the plants and the bones beneath. These markers don't see much traffic, but that doesn't mean they don't matter. There's one you've always liked, a stone carved with a crooked bird mid-flight. No name, no dates, just that strange bird with a wing that doesn't quite line up. You once asked the priest about it. He shrugged and said, "Folk had odd ideas. Maybe it meant freedom, maybe it was just someone who liked birds." Historians still argue whether these older headstones had secret meanings, symbols only the villagers understood. A spiral for a midwife, a crescent for someone born under an eclipse, a jug tipped sideways for a drinker, or maybe for someone who poured themselves out for others. You prefer that second version. You leave a pebble on the crooked bird stone. It's a small gesture, but it says, "You were here." The light fades fast now. You head back toward the cottage, boots soft over the moss. As you pass the chapel, you hear the creak of its old door swinging open. The priest stands silhouetted, candle in hand. "Evening," he says. "Careful, fox tracks in the south end." You nod. "I'll check them in the morning." He hesitates. "You ever think about retiring?" You smile slowly. "I did, once, back when my knees still bent without protest." He laughs, the sound hollow and warm all at once. "If you do, tell me first. I'll need a week to find someone else mad enough to take it on." You both stand there for a moment, watching the sky. A shooting star cuts through the dusk. "Someone just arrived," he says. You chuckle. "Or someone left." Back home, you light a single candle and settle in with the old grave maps. The parchment smells of beeswax and dust, and the ink is faded to sepia shadows. Tonight, you're trying to cross-reference unmarked plots with the newer ones. There's a dispute brewing between two families, each claiming the same bit of land as their ancestral resting place. You'll need to be diplomatic and factual and very, very patient. You trace the lines with your finger, looking for clues. A patch of disturbed soil, a stone half buried under nettles, a local tale about a man who wandered off and never quite came back. You sketch a new margin note in your cramped, sideways handwriting. Possible overlap, investigate near the elder stump. Outside, the wind returns, rattling the shutters gently like it's asking permission to come in. You ignore it and keep working. When your hand finally cramps, you blow out the candle and lean back, eyes stinging. In the dark, the room is quiet, the kind of quiet only graveyards know, not absence, but presence without noise. You think again of the crooked bird. You think of the boy with the waterlogged shoe. You think of the daisy-shaped stitch in a patch of fresh earth. You whisper, "Still here." And the night listens. Morning comes slowly, stretching pale fingers through the fog that clings stubbornly to the grass. You rise with your usual groan, part ritual, part actual pain, and step outside to find the air thick as porridge. Mist drips from every branch like the trees are weeping in slow motion. Your first stop is the elder stump. Yesterday's note is still fresh in your mind, and so are the two families who stopped by last week, voices clipped with that polite kind of tension people save for grave disputes. You can't blame them. Memory, after all, is personal. But bones don't always agree with memory. You kneel by the stump, which is wide enough to seat a small child, and hollowed at the center like something out of a fairy tale. You run your hand over the soil, too soft, not like the rest. Something's disturbed this ground in the last few seasons. You dig a little, gently, respectfully. And sure enough, just beneath the root tangle, your fingers find the edge of worked stone, a marker fragment, etched with what looks like the curve of an M or maybe a W. It's not much, but it's enough to tell you someone's already there. You make a mental note, mediate, with T if possible. Historians still argue whether rural cemeteries like yours kept good enough records, or if half of them were decided by folk memory, gossip, and whatever the village priest happened to remember that week. In your case, it's a mix. Some documents, some scribbles, some very old ladies with extremely long memories and extremely short patience. Back at the chapel, you copy your discovery into the ledger, noting the stone fragment, soil displacement, and potential prior occupant. You write everything down, not because you have to, but because the dead deserve their footnotes. Midday brings visitors. A farmer asking if he can be buried next to his brother when the time comes. You nod solemnly, hiding his smile when he adds, "Not planning on it soon, mind you." Then a merchant's daughter arrives, bearing a basket of plums and a question about the chapel window. Could she sketch it for her embroidery project? You show her the best angle and watch her draw. Her fingers move fast, and you admire the way she captures the window's crooked charm without fixing it. Later, you share the plums with the priest. One is overripe, leaking syrup down your thumb. "Sticky business," he mutters, wiping his hands. You both burst out laughing for no good reason, which is often the best reason. As the sun droops low, you return to your rounds. The fox tracks the priest warned about earlier are clearer now, small, delicate prints cutting a neat line across the graveyard's south slope. You follow them a while until they vanish into a bramble thicket near the boundary wall. You find a tuft of reddish fur snagged on a thorn. You whisper, "Safe travels," and leave it be. The evening settles in gently, like a well-worn blanket. You light the lanterns along the chapel path, one by one, until the flickering glow stitches gold through the gloom. Fireflies join in, not many, just enough to make the shadows sparkle. At your door, you pause. The stars are out tonight. You count 3 falling streaks before you go inside. You sit with your maps again, and this time your eyes drift not to the unmarked graves, but to the margins, where you doodle little notes. Crow likes this tree. Boy with the whistle buried here. Never plant onions in this corner. Cursed? You don't know if it's true, but you write it anyway. After all, what is a cemetery, if not a place where stories gather to nap? You close the ledger, lean back in your chair, and exhale. Outside, the wind shifts. A low sigh through the pines. You smile. Some nights, the dead feel close, but not in a scary way. More like neighbors. You wake to frost on the window pane. Thin, lacy crystals creep outward from the corners, catching the first light of dawn and turning it into something almost holy. You run a finger along the inside glass, tracing a shape, absent-mindedly, like a monk copying a manuscript. The chill bites your fingertip, but it feels honest, direct. Outside, the ground crunches underfoot. You walk the morning rounds bundled in your thickest wool cloak, a moss-green thing with a patched shoulder that's somehow always damp. The cemetery looks different today, sharper, quieter. Even the birds seem to speak in whispers. Near the northwest wall, you find a surprise, a bundle of wildflowers tied with twine, left on an unmarked patch of soil. No note, no marker, just blooms. Frost clings to their petals, turning them into delicate glass. You kneel beside them. A gesture like this always makes you curious. Someone remembered. Someone still cares, even if they don't say who. You leave the flowers untouched, but whisper, "You were seen," before moving on. At the chapel, the priest is already up, stoking the fire with a stubborn expression and a generous use of elbow grease. You trade greetings and bread crusts and sit beside him as the warmth slowly pushes back the cold. "Know what today is?" he asks, voice full of the sort of mischief reserved for old friends. You blink. "Tuesday?" He smirks. Anniversary of the first burial here, 203 years ago. You raise an eyebrow. And let me guess, you only remember because it's carved on the chapel floor. He nods, unapologetic. Still counts. You both toast the milestone with warm cider from the priest's personal stash. It's too sweet, slightly spicy, and absolutely perfect. Historians still argue whether these rural chapels were built before or after their graveyards. Some claim the church always came first. Others say the dead marked the land long before any bell ever tolled. You believe both. Maybe the land wanted to be sacred, and someone finally listened. After your cider and a second helping of gossip about the cooper's scandalously loud snores, you return to the cottage and pull out a dusty tome, your graveyard's first registry. The handwriting is elegant and jagged at once, like someone trying to look serious but using a goose feather too short. You run your hand down the names, each entry a life condensed into a few careful strokes. The first burial, a woman of unknown age, found at the river bend, laid to rest with an iron ring and dried marjoram. No one claimed her, but someone buried her here, gave her herbs, gave her rest. You trace the line with your finger and nod. There's dignity in record-keeping, even when no one reads the records. You spend the afternoon fixing the chapel bench that groans more than a minstrel with a broken lute. The wood is stubborn, warped from years of damp knees and heavier behinds. You sand it slowly, carefully, savoring the rhythm of your work. In the corner of the chapel, the priest hums. You don't recognize the tune, but it fits. Low and odd and vaguely like something a sheep might sing if it had too much mead. By sunset, the bench is quiet again. You sit on it, testing your handiwork. No creaks? Success. We both sit in the fading light, sipping more cider and watching the dust dance in sunbeams. Do you think, the priest begins, will be remembered? You shrug. Maybe. He smiles. Good enough. Back at the cottage, you open your window to let the cold in, just a little. It smells of pine and promise. You pull your blanket tighter around your shoulders and light a candle. Tonight, you write a letter you won't send. It begins, "Dear you, who placed the flowers today." And it ends with, "Thanks." You place it in the ledger, folded like a secret. Just in case.
The next morning begins with rain. Not a dramatic downpour, but a steady, sulking drizzle that turns the earth into a thick stew and glues your boots to the path with each reluctant step. You tug your cloak tighter, hood slipping over your eyes, and mutter to yourself like a particularly grumpy wizard. Rain always brings memories up from the ground, you've noticed. Not ghosts, at least not the wailing kind, but moments, whispers, old songs. You pass a row of graves and spot a familiar puddle forming over one stone. It always fills first, like the earth remembers being a pond. You chuckle and whisper, "Still thirsty, are we?" before setting down your spade and clearing the nearby drain ditch with practiced flicks of your wrist. As you work, a sound catches your ear, a soft, repetitive squelch, squelch. You turn and find the blacksmith's apprentice, utterly soaked, cradling a wrapped bundle. He stammers, "Could I, leave this with my grandfather?" You nod, motioning him toward the grave you already know by heart. The boy kneels, unwraps the cloth, and reveals a perfectly forged horseshoe, small, elegant, utterly impractical. He said it was the first thing he ever made. I wanted him too. You bow your head, quietly. The boy lays the shoe down like an offering and stands. His face is pink with cold and pride. Historians still argue whether medieval grave goods ever truly went away, or if people just got better at hiding them from clergy. Either way, the impulse lingers, something personal, tucked into the soil, a message in iron. Once the apprentice is gone, you check the placement. It's snug, just beneath the moss. It will weather there gently, until someone else finds it.
Maybe another gravedigger, centuries from now, wondering what kind of smith makes a shoe too small for any hoof. You dry your hands under your cloak and trudge back to the chapel. Inside, the priest is making a heroic effort to brew tea with leaves so old they might qualify as a relic. He offers you a cup. It tastes like wet parchment and vague hope. You both sip in silence, watching the rain pattern the window. The afternoon is spent in the archives, chasing down a request from a traveling monk who insists his great-aunt is buried next to the woman with the cat. You sigh, not again. There are no official records of any cats being interred here, but locals do tend to name graves based on gossip. You finally locate the one with a feline-shaped stone carving and dig into the notes. Margaret T., known for taming feral strays, and once rescued a bishop's hat from a roof. You add a small sketch of a cat in the margin, just because. The rain doesn't stop, but you don't mind anymore. There's something soothing about the constant rhythm, like a lullaby played by the clouds. In the evening, you light the chapel's candles one by one. The flame flickers in rhythm with your breath, and for a moment, the whole building feels alive, breathing, stretching, humming to itself. You linger by the last candle, staring at the flickering light and wondering what it's like to be remembered only by a cat-shaped stone. Probably peaceful. Probably perfect. Back in your cottage, you change into dry socks, an underrated joy, and sit by the window. Outside, the rain glows in the lantern light, silver and soft, like falling stars with nowhere better to be. You jot down a line in your personal notebook. Today, a boy gave a memory back to the earth. And then, without thinking, you add, and the earth held it close. You close the book and smile. It's been a good day, rain and all. By the time the sky clears, the cemetery smells like damp stone and turned soil. Earthy, honest, and slightly nostalgic, like a forgotten root cellar. The rain has left everything softer, shinier. The headstones glisten in the light, their carved names blinking back to life as morning mist curls upward like incense. You step out with your usual supplies, a pail of sand, a brush, your old wooden trowel worn smooth by years of quiet insistence. Today is for restoration. First stop, the stone of Agnes Bellamy, faded, tilted, nearly swallowed by moss. You crouch beside it, sweeping gently, like you're brushing dust from someone's face. Agnes, as the ledger notes, kept bees, healed burns, and brewed a cordial with questionable side effects. You smile at that. A woman after your own heart. As you clean her stone, the bees come. 2 of them, slow and lazy, circling like tiny golden monks. They land briefly on your wrist, then on the stone itself. You pause, nod. Still watching her, huh? Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers believed their bees could carry news to the dead. Some say they told their hives everything, births, weddings, deaths. You rather like that idea. So you lean closer and whisper, Agnes, your great-granddaughter married a mason. Good hands, that one. The bees seem satisfied. They drift off. You move on. Next, a shattered marker from the plague years. No name, just the etched image of a winged hourglass. Time flying, time running out. You kneel and press the pieces together like a puzzle, tracing the chisel marks with your thumb. You'll glue it tomorrow. For now, you sketch it in your notebook. Grave near yew tree, possible infant, symbol intact. Half your work is detective work. The other half is remembering that not everything needs to be solved. By midday, your knees ache and your tea is cold. You retreat to the chapel and sip the last of it while perched on the bench you fixed. Still no creak, still satisfying. Then comes the girl. She's small, no more than 10, with a cloak 2 sizes too big and hair like a field of unbrushed straw. She doesn't say hello, just points to the far row and says, "Is there a lady with a silver shoe buried over there?" You blink. "Not that I know of." She frowns. "I dreamed it." You nod slowly. Dreams have currency in places like this. So you take her over, let her point, and note the patch of grass she's fixated on. It's unmarked, but tidy, the kind of grave that speaks of quiet visits, and someone who doesn't need recognition. She kneels and leaves behind a ribbon, blue, frayed at the ends. No explanation, no name. As you walk her back to the gate, she turns and says, "If you see her, tell her I still remember her dancing." You nod. "I will." And you will. The rest of the day is less magical. Cleaning the tool shed, sharpening a spade, scolding the local goose who insists on nesting beside the compost pile. But even in the routine, you feel it. That hush of something meaningful just beneath the surface. At twilight, you stand by the yew tree and read the day's notes aloud to no one in particular. Agnes, visited by bees. Hourglass, reassembled. Girl spoke of silver shoes. You close your notebook and rest your palm against the bark. Noted, you whisper. That night, by candlelight, you draw the winged hourglass again. You add a small silver slipper beside it, just in case. You go to bed with your window open, the night air damp and humming. From your pillow, you watch the stars shift through bare branches and wonder, if someone looked down from that sky, would they think this was a place for the dead? Or would they see the small living things, bees, ribbons, whispered names? You smile. Tomorrow, you'll ask the bees if they know anything about silver shoes.
You dream of bells that night, soft, slow, distant. They chime not from a tower, but from beneath the earth, as if the soil itself is calling roll, one by one, gently. You wake with the sound still lingering behind your ears and the oddest sensation that someone has just whispered your name. But no one is there. Outside, dawn is already stirring. A low fog coils between headstones, painting everything in muted white. It softens the world, makes the ordinary feel theatrical, like the stage is set and you've wandered on too early. You wrap yourself in wool, tuck a slice of cheese into your coat pocket, and step into the mist. Today's task is both simple and strange. A local family wants to add a bench near the grave of an uncle they didn't like but now miss terribly. You understand. People are complicated. So are ghosts. You mark the spot beside his stone, a modest thing with flaking paint and the faint etching of a compass rose. You dig the holes, level the legs, and seat the bench carefully, like it's joining a solemn conversation already in progress. As you work, a robin hops nearby, watching with suspicious interest. "Don't judge," you mutter. "We all sit somewhere eventually." By midday, the fog lifts enough for a few visitors to arrive. One older woman with a walking stick, a pair of siblings who only speak to each other in rhymed couplets, you don't ask, and a man you've seen before, who never visits anyone but always walks the full perimeter, clockwise, always clockwise. You nod to each, offer a smile to those who will take it, and return to your duties. Among them, repairing a toppled stone near the southern fence. It's not vandalism, just gravity, moss, and time doing what they do best. You wedge a support beneath it and brush away the moss. The inscription is faint but poetic. "I never owned the sky, but it knew my name." You pause, whisper it aloud, let it echo in your chest. Historians still argue whether medieval epitaphs were composed by priests, family members, or the dying themselves. You suspect the best ones wrote themselves, carved slowly into hearts before ever reaching stone. Later, while taking your tea on the chapel step, you hear the clink of iron, not the bell, something else. You follow the sound. Behind the tool shed, tucked beneath an overturned bucket, is a bundle wrapped in oilskin. You unfold it to find an old cleric's robe, neatly folded, and a key. No note, no explanation. You check the chapel's lock, still functional. The key doesn't fit. So now you have a mystery. You add it to your book under Unexplained, Possibly Important, right next to Silver Shoe and Hat Buried with Turnips. As dusk settles, you light lanterns along the path. The flame wobbles in the wind, but holds, like you. Back in your cottage, you finally unwrap the cheese. It's squashed, still edible. You nibble it while flipping through the ledger, pausing at the entry for a long-forgotten grave labeled only ST. Beside it, someone, perhaps you, years ago, has written in the margin, "Sang to the wind, danced to silence, slept with a smile." You read it 3 times. And, for no reason at all, you laugh. Because this job, this odd, sacred, muddy, glorious job, is full of people you've never met and somehow already miss. You crawl into bed and pull the blankets tight. Outside, an owl calls once. You whisper back.
You start the day with a mystery and a bowl of porridge that tastes vaguely of ash and maybe regret. The fire went out sometime after midnight, and it took 3 tries and a prayer to the wood spirits to coax it back. The oilskin-wrapped bundle from yesterday still sits on your table beside your cup. The robe smells of incense and dried rosemary, and the iron key winks at you under candlelight. It doesn't fit the chapel, or the cellar, or the box under the altar. So maybe it's not meant to open anything physical. You tuck it into your pouch anyway. It feels important. Your first stop is the grave of old Henry Pitch. His stone has leaned like a drunken sailor for weeks, and today you intend to sober it up. You bring wedges, a spirit level made of string and luck, and a small wooden mallet you named Diplomacy. Henry was a mason, and you're fairly sure he'd appreciate the irony. As you lift the stone, something shifts underneath, a carved coin, half buried in loam. Not real currency, more like a wooden token with a crow etched on one side and the words "Safe Passage" on the other. You pocket it, gently. Historians still argue whether medieval tokens like this were used in spiritual rites or just odd folk traditions. You suspect both. Or neither, or something stranger. The work is slow but satisfying. Each tap of diplomacy into place feels like a sentence punctuated. You straighten the stone, pat the earth, and whisper, "There you go, Henry," standing proud again. You spend the afternoon repairing the path from the chapel to the back fence. Years of boots and burials have turned it into a serpentine trench. You lay fresh gravel, straighten edging stones, and rescue one unfortunate toad who got trapped in a rain rut. By mid-afternoon, you're filthy and sore and oddly content. The chapel bell rings, 2 notes, slow and even. Not a funeral, just a call. Inside, the priest greets you with a nod and hands you a sealed envelope. No name, just a wax seal stamped with a tree. You break it open. Inside, a single line written in firm hand. She waits beneath the stone with no name. You and the priest exchange glances. "No idea," he says, sipping tea from the world's oldest cup. You do, though. There's only one grave in this place with no name and no mark, just a slab of stone, blank and cold, at the very back near the wild hedge. You go there at dusk. The slab hasn't moved, nothing beneath it stirs, but you kneel anyway, press your hand to the cold surface, and feel not a chill, but a pull, like gravity sideways. You take out the wooden token and lay it on the stone. It doesn't vanish or glow, it just rests there, quietly, like it belongs. As night rises, you light your lantern and walk back slowly, watching your breath puff in the air like speech from another world. In your cottage, you add another line to your notebook. Unmarked stone, crow token returned. No dreams tonight, please. Then, with a wink at the fire, you whisper, "Sleep tight, Henry," and whoever she was.
You wake to a knock, not loud, not frantic, but persistent in a way that suggests whoever's outside has all the time in the world. You pull on your boots and open the door. No one.
Just a bundle wrapped in burlap, neatly set on your step. Inside, 3 carrots, a pinch of lavender, and a smooth stone carved with the letter G. You stare at it for a moment, then glance toward the cemetery. Mist clings low to the grass, and the yew tree seems to lean just slightly your way. You take the bundle inside, place the stone beside the crow token, and jot another note. Mystery gift. Probably not poison. Might be a thank you. The air outside is crisp today, bracing enough to sting your lungs in the best way. You sling your tool pack over your shoulder and make for the south wall, where the ivy's grown too bold again, creeping over graves like a lazy dragon. You spend an hour pulling it back, apologizing to the roots as you go. One stone beneath the ivy reads, Martha. She sang too loud and we loved it. You pause. Grin. Then sing one line of an old tavern song, just for her. Later, you check on the compost. It's steaming. Good sign. You pitch in a few apple cores and whisper, keep cooking, old friend. There's something oddly reassuring about rot done right. Your next task is unpleasant, but necessary. The oldest part of the cemetery, the bit no one visits, has begun to sink. The land there is soft, riddled with tunnels from rabbits, and in a few places the earth has collapsed inward, revealing bones that should have stayed hidden. You patch the earth gently, like tucking in a child. You hum while you work, old lullabies and the occasional nonsense rhyme. Bury bones and sip your tea. Say goodbye, but quietly. Historians still argue whether grave songs were a widespread tradition or simply local superstitions. You figure that if someone sings to bones and the bones rest easy, that's tradition enough. By midday, you're called to assist with a procession. A merchant's widow, wealthy enough to afford silk but kind enough to share it. The mourners carry white flowers. You walk at the edge, holding a lantern, even though it's daylight. At the grave, as the final prayer echoes into stillness, a child drops a small wooden spoon onto the coffin. The priest frowns. You nod. Later, you retrieve the spoon, clean it, and tuck it into your pocket. You'll place it at the altar tonight. No one buries a cook without her tools. The afternoon brings an unexpected visitor, a tall man in a brown cloak, face hidden, who stands at the gate and says nothing. You approach. Offer a greeting. He hands you a scroll, says nothing, walks away. Inside, a poem, written in exquisite hand. She danced with silence, loved by shadow, named by none but night. You add it to your ledger. Beneath it you write, maybe she of the unmarked stone. The sun sets orange and wide. You light the lanterns again, each one a promise. Back in your cottage, you place the spoon on the altar and whisper, for the hands that fed. You sit with your tea, let the steam fog your glasses, and feel the quiet fold around you like linen sheets still warm from the sun. The cottage creaks, the fire snaps, and in the silence you hear it again. A bell, faint as memory. You whisper, I hear you, and the sound fades. The next morning, you find frost tracing every stone with a delicate hand, as if some gentle spirit spent the night doodling on marble and slate. Even your shovel has a silver outline, glinting in the early light. You pull your cloak tighter, rub your hands, and greet the cemetery with a gravelly, "Mornin' all," as you always do. It's habit now, acknowledgement, ritual, or maybe just good manners. Today, you have an apprentice. Not official, of course, just a boy from the village, sent by his mother to get some air and perspective. He's got shoes too big, questions too many, and the boundless energy of someone who's never lifted a tombstone. You show him the ledger, the shed, the path of least resistance between tasks. He nods a lot, speaks rarely, and when he does, it's often to say, "Do bones really whistle?" or "Do ghosts prefer the east side?" You answer him honestly, "Sometimes, and only when the moon's full and they've been asked nicely." He beams. You suspect he'll come back.
You teach him how to clean moss from an engraving, how to use the brush in gentle circles, never scraping. You're not fighting the stone, you explain. You're reminding it has a name. He gets quiet after that. Together, you work along the northern edge, where the ground buckles from tree roots below. You show him how to shore up the earth, pack stones around the roots without harming them, and when to stop and let nature win. Some graves want to vanish, you say. He thinks about that for a long time. You take a break at midday, share bread and apples on the chapel steps. He asks what the oddest burial you've ever seen was. You tell him the story of the knight who wanted to be buried standing up so he could face death like a man. Unfortunately, the ground didn't agree. 2 days later, the grave collapsed, and they buried him the normal way. Historians still argue, you add, whether that was his fault or the gravedigger's. The boy laughs until apple comes out of his nose. In the afternoon, a cart arrives at the gate. A young woman, tearful but smiling, brings a crate of flowering bulbs. "My grandmother loved this place," she says. "Can you plant these near her?" You do. Not near her headstone, but all along the back fence, where the sun lingers just a little longer. You dig in silence. The boy helps. Together, you cover the bulbs with soil and press it flat, like a blanket tucked in tight. "Next spring," you say, "this whole row will sing." You walk back with the boy as the sky turns lavender. He hums, barely audible. At the gate, he stops. "Will they remember me," he asks, "when I'm buried?" You kneel, look him in the eyes. "If you love something," you say, "and you care for it, and you leave it better than you found it, yes, even if the name fades, someone will remember." He nods, then runs home. Back in your cottage, you light a candle, then another. The unmarked stone, the crow token, the spoon, the robe, the key, they sit in a row like players in a dream you haven't dreamed yet. You open your ledger and write, "Today, a helper, a story shared, new blooms beneath old ghosts." You close the book. The wind stirs outside. You whisper, "Rest easy," and the wind answers. This morning, the fog arrives like a shy guest, soft-footed, cool, unwilling to knock. It clings to your cloak, brushes your cheeks, and swallows the fence posts one by one as you walk the path from your door. The cemetery looks different like this, smaller somehow, like a memory of itself. You can barely see the chapel until you're at its door, and even then it feels like a mirage, part stone, part dream. You carry nothing but your hands. No shovel today, no wheelbarrow, just your ledger and a sense that something is wrapping itself up. You walk each row, touch each stone. Some are new, names still crisp. Others are worn down to initials or less, just outlines of people long folded into the earth. You whisper as you go, little nothings, "Still here," and "Looking sharp today," and "That crow's been pecking your moss again." By the tree near the fence, the first crocus is peeking through. You smile. The woman's bulbs kept their promise. Near the unmarked grave, the fog thickens. You kneel there once more, the crow token now resting atop the slab like it's always belonged. You place the wooden spoon beside it, gently, for whoever she was. A final offering. You don't speak, just sit. Let your breath join the fog. Eventually, you rise and return to the chapel. Inside, the priest has made tea. He nods, wordless as ever. You sit on the bench by the window, watch the mist roll past the glass like sleep itself made visible. He says, "They asked for you." You blink. "Who?" He shrugs, "Didn't leave a name." Outside, the bell rings once, low, like a heartbeat. You write your final note in the ledger. "The fog came. The flowers woke. I remembered all their names." Then you close it, and the candle beside you flickers, then stills. The fog lifts slowly,
like a soft blanket drawn away from a sleeping world. The stones glisten with dew now, each one catching the first hint of morning light in its own quiet language. Flashes of silver, hints of mossy green, the dull shimmer of lichen stretching like a yawn across time. You walk once more through the rows, not with purpose, but with presence. You feel the weight of the spade no longer on your shoulder, the echo of steps that have tread this path so many times they've memorized your rhythm. The yew tree sways gently, and you remember the boy's question, "Will they remember me?" And you think, not every name is carved in stone. Some are whispered into earth, sung into seed, tucked inside ledgers and lullabies. And even if the names vanish, the care remains. You stop near Martha's grave, the one who sang too loud, and you hum again, off-key, on purpose. In the distance, the bell does not ring, because not every day is an ending. Some days are simply soft. You return to your cottage, where the fire has burned low but not out. You sit in your chair, wrap the blanket tighter, let your breath settle with the dust and the fading candlelight. And in that hush, deeper than sleep, older than stone, you hear it. Not a voice, not a sound, just a feeling, like the earth remembering you back.